recovery and resilience plan. We're going to do some introductions here in a minute, but a couple housekeeping items we want to go over. First, this is being streamed live, so we have microphones for folks that can participate on Zoom. So when you do speak, please make sure you push the button to go from Stephanie. We rearranged the room today. So please hit your microphone button so it goes from red to green when you speak, and hold it close enough to your mouth so the people on virtually can hear you. We also have branch members that are participating in person here. So the idea of the workshop is for them to dive a little bit deeper and understand specific topic areas, which we'll go over in a little bit. And we also have branch members joining virtually on Zoom. So branch members that are joining virtually, if you have a comment or a question for the panel, please drop it into the chat. And we are monitoring the chat, and we'll make sure that gets to the panelists for discussion. The other thing is we have about 2 hours together this morning. This is the first of 3 workshops for today, focused on resilience hubs. And so we will, there'll be lots of back and forth between the branch and the panel. Branch members, you can engage however you want. Just take your mic off mute or get Tessa or Lee's attention. And we'll go from there. See, I feel like I forgot something. What did I forget, Harrison? Oh, as we think about the conversation today, so we're really thinking, and I'll talk about this a little bit bigger. This is more than Hurricane Ian. This is thinking the long term for our community. This is thinking about the long-term resilience of Lee County. So we recognize that there are things and topics that we're going to discuss throughout the workshops today that have implications related to disasters and hurricanes, but this is looking at the bigger picture, the longer term for our community. So when we start talking about solutions, they aren't just post-disaster solutions, they're long-term solutions for our community. And so we want to make sure that that's where we land and that's where we get to with what we're building towards. So before we go much further, we're going to do some introductions. Alani, can you help me with the slides, please? We're going to do some quick introductions of the panelists and those of us that are facilitating the conversation, and then we will go through the agenda. So first, my name is John Romine. I'm part of the team here at Collaboratory, part of the support team, really working on this recovery task force behind the scenes work. And we'll have Lee.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Lee Mayfield. I'm our Director of Response for Hagerty Consulting, here to support just the facilitation piece today. Before that, I had the pleasure of serving as a Director of Emergency Management in Lee County here for a while, and also worked in Collier County before that. So Southwest Florida overall has been home for about 14 years. I'm up in Tampa now, but great chance to get back and engage on this important topic. This is a big ideas conversation. The opportunities that we have post Hurricane Ian don't come along too often. And while that was a very significant and unfortunate event, there's opportunity with that, like John said, to improve and work through not just disaster response and recovery issues, but at the same time focus on how we can improve day-to-day life in our community. So looking forward to helping to facilitate, chime in, maybe give some of my lessons from my past here in Southwest Florida. And thanks for being here.
Alvin Henderson, City of Cape Coral Emergency Management Division Manager. I've been there for just about 5 years now. Prior to that, I was at the county level in southwestern Pennsylvania. So overall, I have over 35 years of public safety emergency management experience. Thank you.
Katie Eck, I'm the years.
Good morning, everybody. Ben Abus, Director of Public Safety for Lee County.
Good morning, Kate Major, Director of Social Services and Education at Community Cooperative.
Good morning, Madison Mitchell, Vice President of Community Impact with United Way of Lee, and filling in for Janine Joy, our CEO and President.
And I'm Tessa Lesage. I work here at Collaboratory. Happy to be supporting with the facilitation today.
And we have two panelists, I believe two panelists that are on Zoom. So if both of you could come off mute, I think Robbie's going to stop share so we can see your face.
Hi, good morning. My name is Kendra Apkowitz. I'm Chief Sustainability and Resilience Officer with the City of Nashville and Davidson County. I've been in that role about 2 years, and one of the things we've been working really hard to do is build resilience into city operations. So happy to join you all today.
Morning, everyone. I'm Baja. I'm the Director of Direct Support and Innovation with the Urban Sustainability Directors Network and the originator of the Resilience Hub concept when I worked with the City of Baltimore back in 2012. Excited to be with you all today and have had the opportunity to work with several communities in Florida around Resilience Hub. So really excited to be part of the conversation.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Nelson. I'm the founding principal at Resilient Cities Catalyst. We're a nonprofit working with communities, cities, regions across the country on both resilient strategies in the wake of disaster, but also planning for the future around challenges we face every day. We're currently working with several communities, building off the great work that Baja led at USDN on resilience hubs in neighborhoods, particularly in Houston, as well as Tampa and elsewhere. Pleasure to be here with you this morning.
Great. And we heard from Harrison earlier. He's also, along with several others from both Collaboratory and Hagerty, on the support team behind the scenes. So if you need anything from any of us, you know where to find us. And we are going to quickly go through. All right, perfect. So we're going to do a little high-level overview of what the Recovery Task Force is, both for everybody in the room, but also for those that are maybe not from this community or those that are watching live, and this is the first time they've heard of the Recovery Task Force. So the Recovery Task Force is built on the FEMA framework. So this is the disaster response. This happens across the country and communities whenever a disaster happens. And in Lee County, it's led by the Board of County Commissioners. So Commissioner Kevin Ruane is the chair, and then the remaining 12 members are from the elected bodies across the entire county. And the importance of this is a cross-jurisdictional solution approach. And so looking at how we approach the solutions post-Ian and then for a resilient community as a whole, it's going to take all of the different municipalities across the county. It's broken up into 8 branches, and these branches meet once a month. Those are public meetings. Step backwards real quick. There is public comment at the end for the public. If you want to participate, we will get through the workshop, and then we will have a time for some public comment for you to share based on what you heard. And so these meetings, also the branch meetings, which are held monthly, are also public meetings. And that's where the branches really start to identify what the priorities are and where they can, what those solutions are for some of those initial priority areas that were identified. And so we have planning and capacity, economic recovery, education and workforce, health and social services, infrastructure, housing, natural resources, and cultural resources. So a lot of today's conversation is going to be around the health and social services topics that have come up in some of those branches, as well as other branches that have brought things up related to that branch's work. We've been on a bit of an aggressive timeline for those of you that have participated. This work started in late February, early March, and we're driving towards a December 5th Board of County Commissioners board meeting where they'll vote on the recovery and resiliency plan for the entire county. And so we just wrapped up this initial phase of gathering information, both from the branches, but also robust community engagement. Because at the end of the day, this is the community's plan. And so we want to make sure that all of that input, the expertise that comes from the panelists, as well as the expertise that comes from the branches is part of this long-term plan. The branches are also made up of members from throughout the community. And so I think it's important that we recognize the role that community plays in developing this plan. To Lee's point, we're looking at how do we make Lee County more resilient every day, not just post-disaster. So we are exiting this sort of gathering of information stage and really driving into this solution stage. So over the summer, we'll be building these, what we're calling initiatives that will have projects to really how do we implement, how do we make Lee County more resilient? And so that is part of what this week's all about, is the branches identified, some members from the community identified where we needed some more technical expertise, where we needed to inform some of our approaches, both from a local level, local expertise, and as you heard on Zoom, a national and an international point of view. This plan will be sort of developed over the summer. It'll go back out to the community late summer, early fall, and then ultimately will be to the Board of County Commissioners in December. Related to community engagement, you know, it was a lot of effort. And so we had 17 total town halls. 2 of them were virtual. These were held across the entire community, Lee County, and at the neighborhood level or the planning community level. And we had 2 virtual options, and the town halls were also provided in both English and Spanish in multiple cases to make sure that we heard the voice of the community. We've had about 1,000 folks participate in the town halls, and then we have also a digital way to collect data and information and priorities from community members with our online survey, which is at resiliently.com. If you haven't taken it, or you know folks that haven't taken it that you think have ideas that they can share, please share it with them. It is still open. We're still collecting input from that to really make sure that this is informed from the community. And then on March 30th, we had a region-wide, so it's for the 5 counties on the table, which was a day-long event where folks gathered together and shared meals together, shared coffee, to really have conversations about what they cared about solving in our community. And about 1,000, a little over 1,000 folks participated in the survey after that. More than 4,000 people participated across the region. And we got about 1,000 survey responses from that, where people started to prioritize the things that mattered most to them that we needed to focus on in the community. And so this week, I shared at the beginning, is all about workshops. And so we have branch meetings once a month. The Recovery Task Force meets once a month, the 4th Friday of every month here at Collaboratory. And then this week has been building from those initial 3 branch meetings towards these workshops. And so there's 4 themes this week. There's 4 themes. On Monday, we talked all about critical infrastructure. Yesterday, we talked about supporting business and workforce. Today's all about community resilience. And then tomorrow, all day long, we're going to be talking about housing. And so housing has consistently been the #1 priority across every community in not just Lee County, but Southwest Florida for over a year. And so the hurricane just shined a bit of a brighter light on how important it is that we need to tackle that. And so that is what we will be doing today. And so I can't stress this enough. We're trying to get to solutions. So these workshops are not focused on revisiting what happened at the storm. There may be pieces of that specifically in some of today's conversations, but the idea is, how do we drive towards solutions? So whenever the next disruption, doesn't have to always be a storm, happens, we have the solutions in place for our community. And so that'll be the essence of what we're trying to achieve out of today's conversation. So we have local, national, and international expertise to really help inform the branches, both online and in person, for what those solutions might be. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lee to get the party started to have a conversation about resilience hubs.
All right, thanks, John. So again, this is exciting. I think after previous events, hurricanes in Lee County, you know, obviously they were impactful to our community, but nothing at the level of Ian here. And like we mentioned, that brings opportunity, it brings resources, it brings funding. And I think that's a big driver of these bigger picture conversations here. So, I mean, it's exciting that I mean, I don't think in our history here, we've been able to really drive home these bigger picture conversations and really focus on big ideas and longer term solutions. So, and Tessa is going to continue to drive home and move the ball down the field here on these questions and drive us to solutions here based on our discussions. But I'll just start out, you know, this idea of resilience hubs. I think is something that is exciting to talk about. And just an initial question, I think, to the group, when we talk about those assets in the community, I think through the Emergency Operations Center, through our normal day-to-day human services network, there are obviously a lot of agencies that do great work in our community. I think what we wanted to talk about was how we better engage them, how we involve them, and how we loop them into this process, both day-to-day and in support from a preparedness standpoint and a response recovery standpoint. So I think that just to kick off that first question, what assets, and you frame this from a social services perspective, what assets, organizations, groups in our community should we be engaging on this effort? I think that's the overall question, and maybe somebody can kick us off just with some general ideas of what types of agencies or assets are out there in our community that we need to loop in and continue this conversation on resilience hubs from a neighborhood perspective. So I'll open that up to the group, and we'll just dive right in.
Willie, if I could kick us off then?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, when you pose that question, right away, and I'm probably biased because I'm an employee there, but I think of United Way. So, with our network of agencies, we have over 100 partners that we work with on a blue skies day, let alone when we go into disaster response mode. As far as assets that are out there, when this is my first meeting with the task force, but when I was speaking with Janine and we talked about this resilience hub, my first reaction was, oh, well, we have those already. We have 15 United Way houses throughout vulnerable communities here in Lee County that provide response in day-to-day crises that the individuals are facing, but also in that disaster response mode. And so I feel like we are very looped in. So as far as agencies we should be engaging, I feel like we are already very much engaged with all the familiar faces I see here today. But I think that there's already a very strong existing infrastructure that can be built upon further. So I would start and pose it to the group that the United Way network is already in place.
Katie, go ahead.
I think it's important to remember that a lot of our most vulnerable communities actually have really strong relationships within that community. You think about the Harlem Heights Foundation, and it's important that you engage with those individual entities that are constants in that community, that know that community, that are truly a part of that community and are trusted agents to that community. Because what happens is if you are not engaging with them in blue skies, and if you are not, being collaborative with them in blue skies, you don't have that basis of trust when it's time, when we're in response and when we're in recovery. And in some communities, we have better access. In others, we have a lot more difficulty. I think about the Haitian population in Lee County. We have tremendous difficulties making inroads with that population. And I get it. I completely understand why that is, but it is something that we were typically working towards. But it's important that not just United Way, which is all encompassing, but those smaller community-centric foundations, which are present in some of our most vulnerable communities, Charleston Park, they have these smaller centers, these smaller foundations, these smaller agencies, and it's difficult because there's so many of them and they're smaller, but it's a worthy effort if we can engage with them and show them that we care every day, not just when we're worried about the news cycle.
I'm sorry, you both referenced blue skies. Do you just mean not traumatic times?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So this is a really interesting point, and something that I think we've noticed as well here at Collaboratory, this idea of we have to be building those relationships every single day, because after a disaster is not the time that those relationships need to be built. There's no time for that. We have to be able to leverage those relationships before a disaster, the immediate short term after, and then as part of the recovery effort. So it is a challenge because we have these overarching organizations like the United Way that have these relationships, but you need that other relationship that's really on the ground. So any ideas or thoughts on how we can make that network something that is more accessible in terms of getting out information beforehand, figuring out who the players are? Does anyone have any examples of how that's been done elsewhere? Alvin?
Yeah, and I think it's important that we in emergency management, obviously, we do threat and hazard vulnerability analysis on our communities. And it is always looking at what the threats are. I think also we have to change a little bit how we're thinking and look at what's working well for us in the communities, not only from the community perspective, like the organizations that have been already mentioned, but also our business community, which is very important to us as well, to be able to provide those lifeline services and supplies to our community to help us during blue skies when everything is going well, but also after a disaster, and we're in gray sky operations, as we refer to that as. So as we reach out during the planning and preparedness, working with those groups to understand what is working well for them, how we could support them in that endeavor, but then also engage with our Chamber of Commerce's from the business side of that as well, and working with those businesses through our chambers to have each of those businesses better prepared so they're more resilient, have their employees and their staff members better prepared for those disasters, and being able to recover and keep providing services. So it allows those services and supplies that are available on a daily basis to survive a disaster and be able to be engaged post-disaster. So we would not have to do things like points of distribution.
Perfect. I think Baja wants to speak as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think one of the things I'll say about that is I completely agree with you that the business and business community needs to be involved, and there are opportunities to really bring them in so many ways through hubs. But one of the intentions of hubs is for them to be uniquely serving the neighborhoods, the communities, and every neighborhood is different. And so having these locations be prioritized in the communities where they're most needed, where folks maybe don't have access to other resources or other capacities that other individuals might have who have more means. So there's a prioritization element here, but there's also sort of a giving up or a shifting of power to those community members to be more self-determining and autonomous, to be able to identify what resources might be needed. And I really appreciate the other two comments earlier about blue sky days, because those are the most important moments and times for building resilience. It's where we're thinking about that social cohesion and connectivity, but it's also that opportunity to then identify who are the surrounding businesses that can start to funnel resources, funnel information, funnel even opportunities through these sites, so that there's trust building with the surrounding business community, there's trust building with the county, and there's trust building amongst the community themselves. So I just wanted to mention, I think there's a lot of synergy there.
Yeah, Baja, that's a great comment. And I think, as Alvin mentioned, you can talk about, solutions and who owns those solutions. I think, us, at least when I say us in my former role, I looked at it as our role is to empower our stakeholders to get back on their feet as soon as possible. We wouldn't always have the solution immediately, but if we spend those blue sky days, which are 99% of how we spend our days, right? The hurricanes don't come, that often, thankfully. But us, as a collective group, when it comes to prioritizing, providing opportunity and even funding to these groups to allow them to build up their capabilities during blue sky days, so they can handle a lot of what needs to happen during and after a disaster, and that foundation is laid. I'm curious, are there, when we talk about hubs or locations, of course it'll be different throughout our community. Are there physical locations, and maybe even from the United Way perspective, or the groups that Katie mentioned, are there physical locations where these groups are working out of, where the community knows where to go to get trusted information, and is that worthy of a discussion to figure out what prioritization there is with these physical locations maybe?
So the locations that I talked about, so what we do is we partner with the boots on the ground agencies. United Way does not have staff that, these are not United Way offices in these locations. We partner with the ground organizations in these communities. So Charleston Park, Dunbar, Tice, San Carlos Park, Bonita, Estero, we have them on all of our barrier islands. we do have these locations where we are not the organization that says this is what you need to be providing. The organization then tells us what their community needs. A lot of them have community task force already in place that advise on what services should be there. There are some core services that the majority of them have, like food pantries or food distribution events, but some of them have culinary kitchens because employment skills are something that that community really needs. Some of them have English as a second language because that's a needed service. So last year we had over 450,000 unique services go out the door throughout that network. And then when we're trying to harden these communities for an impending disaster or any significant event, we do push out all that information to those boots on the ground agencies so they can be sharing that with their clients and the families that they are serving. And so most of them were able to open immediately following Ian, and served as points of distribution for those life preserving items, water, food, and information. And they have transitioned now to recovery activities. And so that is kind of the model that we currently have with the houses.
So I have a question. I was wondering if maybe Paul or Baja could actually tell us a little bit to frame the conversation about what is a resilience hub so that everyone's on the same page, because I'm recognizing we may not all have an understanding of that, because I'm hearing like blue skies and gray skies and all these things, and I know that that's not how I usually talk. So there might be some need to kind of lay the groundwork on what a resilience hub is. So would one of you on Zoom, Paul or Baja, like to unmute and help us understand?
Sure. Paul, I might go first, and then if you want to build off of it, I know that you and I have been working together on these for a while, but resilience hubs are essentially, they are physical building. So they're not a movable site. They're physical building and location in a neighborhood that are essentially providing the daily services and programs and support to community members within that neighborhood or a defined area. They're essentially kind of what we would call like a node or a point of social cohesion and connectivity. They're an opportunity for all kinds of different agencies, departments, and groups to funnel resources, capacity, and support. But then they are augmented to also be able to withstand the hazards and disruptions that we all face, and to continue to have the services and programs be able to support community members throughout a disaster and then through recovery. So they are functioning in what we would call as kind of the everyday mode, which is what has been referred to as blue skies, where we do spend 99% of the time. And notice there are a lot of challenges and needs in that mode. But then we have the disruption and the recovery as well, and those are important. So just functioning in all three of those modes. And there, Paul, I'm sure you have other elements to add.
I mean, you sort of said it perfectly, Baja. They're just trusted community institutions, and as has been referenced, that will look different in different neighborhoods, right? That could be in some cases a faith-based institution, in other places that could be a community center, but they are those physical locations. The only two things I'd add is, oftentimes, enhancing sort of in our experience the sort of community preparedness function that these nodes provide. We found that, the resilience hubs where we've been working with communities on them are really already those blue sky day providers, those trusted places that, provide needed services, programs for community residents. And there's an opportunity when thinking about resilience hubs to really partner with agencies, county, city, and others to enhance that community preparedness mindset and preparation. Beyond that, there's also sort of, I know we're not necessarily talking about that this morning, but the physical upgrades to these sites that may be necessary to harden them to withstand certain disruptions, whether those are climate or others. And so it's just the notion that these nodes that can be activated, yes, in times of disaster, but are there for the good times and blue sky days as well.
I don't know why I turned this off, because then I never remember to turn it back on. Thank you so much. That's really, really helpful. And I think that our infrastructure branch has talked extensively about the need to harden places, the actual buildings of the places where people go and trust, to distribute sort of the responsibility and the ability to manage during a disaster. And I love the idea, that they function on a regular basis to provide other resources to communities. I mean, we have a problem with access, right? We have a transportation problem here. It's very difficult to get people to all of the things that they need, not just during an evacuation, but otherwise. And so having those things readily available in the communities that need them is potentially something that could be a huge benefit. Yes.
Hey, my name is Marco Villalobos, outreach pastor at Cape Christian Church, and I started this position a year ago today. So when it was blue skies.
Congratulations.
Yeah, and was not too busy doing all my church things, and was like, you know what, I need a challenge. And then we had a black day.
Okay, no more requesting challenges.
Right, my first hurricane, and our church became a distribution center. Where all of a sudden we would just started passing out a couple hundred meals, and it turned to 400 the first day, 1,000 the second day. By the fourth day, we were serving 20 to 30,000 meals a day. Had 700 volunteers showing up, 5,000 cars coming through, and this just because our motto is our city, our responsibility. And so we did all the distribution there. But then we started doing just helping out with different houses and doing hurricane relief type organizations. And so I got to meet a lot of people here in the city really fast. And so we went through that, and then we did a serve day in March where we had 2,000 volunteers work with over 100 different organizations like United Way and like Fish of Sand Cap, All Hearts and Hands, Habitat for Humanity, the Sanibel Captiva Conversation Foundation, Rebuild Southwest Florida. So we built relationships with all these different organizations on just a blue sky day. The city of Cape Coral, I think that this past year started a serve day on Earth Day. And so I know that's planned to do something once a year. And so I wonder, just to kind of build relationships and have it be more consistent, maybe we do 2 of those a year, or maybe even, this might be ambitious, but maybe quarterly, and me being an outreach pastor, I'd love to be a part of that, of course, and mobilize our church to be a part of even helping that in our city, because that's what our city needs, and so there's a thought.
Yeah, so this idea that in addition to going where people already go and where they trust, and making sure that those places are prepared for a disaster, so finding resources, making them part of the pre-planning of that, but then also figuring out how do we connect them to more resources so that they have what they need.
Yeah, Pastor, that's a great story. God bless you. The last year, it must have been a whirlwind. That's interesting. We at a conference a couple weeks ago, the Governor's Hurricane Conference, we had a workshop entitled FEMA Public Assistance for Houses of Worship. And that's a relatively new program that a lot of folks don't know about, but houses of worship based on your business status can apply for FEMA reimbursement after disasters. And this is something that I think we're trying to socialize more, get out there more, and make sure everyone's aware, because that's one resource. And I think there are other resources there that may not be as widely circulated, just to add that one specifically to the list. But there are opportunities out there, I think, as you guys are force multipliers in the community, and probably don't get the credit. I know you don't need that, but don't get the credit for all the good work you do after events. And however we can better plug you into that system throughout the year is going to pay dividends for everybody, the people that we all serve.
So I want to just touch base with the folks on Zoom, since they have a bit of an outside perspective. Anything that any of you would like to add to this part of the conversation before we move to another question?
The only thing I might mention is, and I really appreciate all of FEMA's resources and materials, but also to think more expansively, not centering the hazard as much as just making sure we're centering the humans and the human needs first and foremost, because FEMA has been so hazard focused. If we can just switch that mentality in some ways, it really does create more expansive opportunities and helps community members think about what a resilience hub can be in these other types or modes or in these blue sky days. So just reframing sometimes really helps.
So Lee, I think we have a question online.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. So we do have a question online from a branch member, Maya Roberts, City of Cape Coral Environmental Manager. For Cape Coral, Fort Myers area, based on the comments, it seems that one of the actions and projects we have to incorporate within the next few months is to be able to compound the synergies you have talked about. If Cape Coral will build a shelter at a rec center or park, then capabilities for those additional functions need to be incorporated upstream in the planning for these infrastructures. I would like to emphasize the need for location for these structures and the need to incorporate partnerships between different branches to enhance education and resources available for the community. North Fort Myers Recreation Center would make a good resilience hub, but is in a flood zone. It might need hardening or adaptation planning. We have to think outside the box and think about community existing or upcoming recreation venues as such resilience hubs.
I'll quickly chime in here. Kendra Apkowitz from Nashville. Apologies, I had to leave and rejoin. You bring up an interesting perspective that we've been thinking about quite a bit as we dive into resilience hubs. Our recreation centers, because they are located literally throughout the entire county, have become a prime location for us to use as resilience hubs. We've also been looking quite a bit at our libraries in terms of looking at, again, municipally owned infrastructure that could be deployed in this way, as well as our schools. One thing that's been really interesting as we navigate that, though, is looking at how a resilience hub functions versus an asset that could be activated as an emergency operations center. And so for the the emergency folks in the room, that might be something that's on your mind. And it's actually taken quite a bit of dialogue with our Office of Emergency Management to better distinguish and clarify how a resilience hub functions versus something that could formally be activated and used in an emergency. And so that's just something to think about there. Going back, though, to community partners, again, our houses of worship have been really eager and well-suited partners, but also a lot of the assets that are used by cultural organizations. We've coordinated quite a bit with our Office of New Americans and our Office of Neighborhoods to use many of those organizations that, again, are trusted partners. And so so those have been, I think, some good options for us. I also wanted to quickly touch on something that came up before. Not only is developing those relationships, during blue skies important, we've also, I think, really tried to ramp up education that we're providing during blue skies. So we have something here in Nashville called Community Emergency Response Training, or CERT training, that any resident of the city can take. And so we display materials regarding that training in our resilience hubs, and also offer that training at our resilience hubs. So you see that nice kind of interplay of not only leveraging those existing relationships, but also priming the community that uses those spaces, so that when an emergency does happen, they've been thinking about the community's role in that process.
Do you want to add to that, Ben? Okay.
I just wanted to say, I know we're talking a lot about the physical location, and I think that's super important, specifically when you have a resiliency hub that's at the center, kind of controlling all the other hubs around the communities. But I think it's also important to talk about how these things and partnerships can help a community once they're active in disaster. So I know I hear from some of these panelists that, just like me, they were doing this for the first time, and so was all their staff. Social service, when it comes to any type of disaster, whether it be hurricane, COVID, red tide, anything like that, we need to think about staff augmentation and the ability to have preparedness staff, whether that be from faith-based partners looking to come into social service branches and provide assistance, because volunteers are wonderful. They'll come right when you need them, but you need a staff member, someone who's more able to control an environment rather than just have volunteers who are here doing the goodwill of the people and servicing the community. So I think it's, again, important to talk about staff augmentation and preparedness, not only a physical location, but people to do the jobs that we need to do after disasters.
To complement these ideas, I just want to say that these strategies have been in existence in Lee County for many years. In my past life as a neighborhood relations specialist with the Lee County Human Services Department, my role was to build the network within the Community Development Block Grant communities, primarily Pine Manor, Page Park, and Harlem Heights. And some of those communities have graduated based on the success of these strategies. I will say that building and working with community members, we had everyone from code enforcement to Hope Hospice to the school district to Lee County Sheriff's Office, community law enforcement officers that came monthly to Pine Manor to meet, to discuss, to understand, to build the relationships with the school as well. And so these aren't new ideas. They often are invisible in our community. And I would say that, as Tessa and I always say, let's make the invisible more visible. And why reinvent the wheel when we've been doing this? We had task force members in Pine Manor certified in CERT, so they were ready to activate. We had a robust team that was culturally appropriate to that area with matriarchs within that neighborhood that built the trust and brought the neighbors to the center. And because of Hurricane Charlie in 2005 is why Pine Manor actually was able to obtain the community center through not only FEMA dollars, but community development block grants. And that happened because of the relationships and the boots on the ground that were there. So I guess my comment would be, let's build those relationships. Let's fund those positions. Let's build more opportunities for employees and citizens to become the neighborhood relations specialist, and let's fund those positions, because building relationships and building capacity within our community often is invisible. It takes years. It's resilient within itself. And knowing growing up here, it takes a while and things change, but we've got the power and the structure to do it here if we definitely focus the energy and the resources and make that a very important role throughout all of our organizations.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen. Ben?
Just a couple of quick comments to dovetail off of what was discussed. And that's a great point. I think, throughout this discussion and throughout the last couple of months, as we've talked with all of our community partners, it seems like all of the components are there, but we don't put them together in blue skies so that they're ready for gray skies. And we have seats in the EOC for volunteers and donations and our faith-based organizations for all of these partners to participate. But again, unless there is pre-storm planning to be able to establish how those partners are going to work in gray skies, then we're simply giving the nod to say, okay, it happened. United Way, let's go do something. And I'm blown away every single storm that we have at the outreach and the work that is done organically, grassroots in the community to be able to support some of those needs. And the example that you gave at Cape Christian is a perfect example. And part of that function has to be that the information on what is going on in the community, what the community needs are, and what actions those community groups are taking comes back to the EOC so that, number one, we're informed of what the real-time gaps are and how we need to better support those groups. But also, if there's capacity to help people, that we can get that word out. If we know that Cape Christian is serving 4,000 meals today, I want to get to the highest rooftop in Lee County, which I think is the EOC. Well, maybe some of the high rises downtown, but
I was gonna say.
I would get on the roof of the EOC and shout it as loud as I could to make sure that people knew that they could come get food from you. Because if they needed those supplies, if they needed food, if they needed whatever, we need to make sure that they understand where they can go and get it. And if communication is down, but we establish pre-storm that these 15 United Way houses
You already know where it's
or these places are where to go, then that's a great opportunity for us to formalize that. And one other thing that I want to mention, we've talked a lot about square feet and facilities.
Yeah.
So whether you're talking about governmental facilities or you're talking about schools or you're talking about, any organization, and I'll use, I think it was Bonita Springs High School that was built a couple of years ago. And the kids that were going to go to Bonita Springs High School were in portables as the school was being built. And typically what happens is you have to have the need and the full need and capacity, or the full need to be there to then build the capacity within those structures. And so when we talk about libraries and rec centers and all those things, they are generally purpose-built after a well-established need has been identified. And then we go through the process of building that, which is going to take several years. And, you know, one of the big challenges we have in the EOC is the amount of public facilities that we have and the needs from the community to use those facilities. I can tell you, we could probably use twice as many governmental facilities on a gray sky day, because there are so many organizations, people that need that space. On a blue sky day, it's a great library.
Yes.
It fully serves its purpose, but it's not, we don't have the additional excess capacity for the gray sky to be able to pull those in. So that's where we have to find those community partners where we can help to bolster their efforts and be ready for the gray skies.
So I have to ask a question on this, and then we have 2 more questions online about this, but I hear. What are you doing? Ooh, I was like, what is happening? Who do you see as the entity that would organize this? Or anyone, or maybe there's an example, but Ben, what are your thoughts?
I mean, typically we have worked with the United Way. And we've also worked with the Community Foundation and Collaboratory on some of those efforts as well. So, you know, we've generally had those community organizations be the lead for those types of efforts.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I don't know the extent to which we have formalized that.
Right.
It's been a lot of, okay, this is what the need is, and let's go get it done.
Yeah. Did you have something?
Yeah, I just had a question, Ben. You referenced having twice the number of facilities needed. You have that in the sense of Cape Christian or the United Way houses is I'm certain it would cost a lot less to harden those or to formalize that relationship. Do you have any idea what needs to be done in the community facilities in order to get it up to the point that you can very directly align with? I'm just going to keep pointing to Cape Christian as a reference.
Yeah, we have a process of I'm going to go back to Blue Sky. Blue Sky facility use agreements or land use agreements where we pre-arrange the use of those facilities and those partner organizations to be able to use the facilities in the event of an emergency. So we have a large number of those agreements already where we can use those types of facilities. And so it's just a process of then going back, identifying those facilities and saying, okay, this is one where we're going to use it. The catch there is that when we make that phone call, we have to make sure that it's available. And what we have found in a number of instances is, again, you know, I talked about the number of entities that came in to the community and needed some kind of a footprint, some kind of place to put down. And so some of them went to people that we had facility use agreements with, and they opened the doors. And then we make the phone call an hour later and say, hey, okay, we're going to activate you and we need to use that facility, and it's occupied and it's no longer available. So it is a two-way street that when we have those facility use agreements, we're betting on those facilities being available when we need them, and not that they're going to be used for some other purpose and suddenly be unavailable for the need in the community.
Can I tap in here for a second? Just, I've been doing resilience hubs for about 10 years across the country, and there were a couple sites that were mentioned that I just want to mention. We have found not to be very successful for several reasons based on what was just said. And that is schools are not a very good location for resilience hubs because they need to be supporting the children. And if something happens, like an active shooter situation, they have to shut down and shut those doors. And there's a reason for that. So they can't be available then to serve as a hub for the community. And I say this because hubs should be used for any type of disruption, not just for hurricanes. So to think about these as response and sort of recovery for any type of a big event that's going to happen in the community, including something like COVID. So when you had a pandemic and people needed to get resources and support, these sites should be serving in that event as well. So I just want to mention when talking about libraries, we've run into a lot of problems with getting access and having those different locations be able to be activated with libraries because they want to protect the books and protect the different spaces. And so just trying to remember that these sites, several of the ones that were mentioned, are used for specific reasons. And if we need them to be used year round, and we're thinking about resiliency around, try to utilize sites like that were mentioned by the United Way that are already serving those purposes year round.
Sorry, just as a quick follow-up. So schools and libraries specifically, and to some extent rec centers as well.
Yeah. Was there more of a question? Sorry.
No, I was just going to make a statement. I mean, one of the things that we saw after Ian was, there was the acute need in the first 7 to 10 days where we needed to get every available resource out into the community to support the members of the community impacted. And then there was the kind of the medium need. And one of our, I think the things that we talked about on a regular basis was we need to get the schools cleared out so that we can resume school. We need to get the libraries cleared out so that they can open up, because the libraries have computers and internet, and people can apply for disaster survivor assistance and IA. We need to get some of those facilities opened up so that FEMA can set up shop, so that there is a place in their neighborhood that has FEMA representatives where they can get that support. So it does have to be, again, very purpose identified for the specific purpose. And in some cases, those larger pillars in the community like schools, we need to focus on using them and vacating them and getting them back open so that kids can get back in school. As soon as we can provide some normalcy and some return to the blue sky conditions, then that provides some greater stability within the community.
So I appreciate the experts out on the this digital world here for refocusing what, in my mind, why we're here. We're here because of Hurricane Ian, so we're very hurricane focused, but what an incredible opportunity to build resiliency hubs to, I wrote here, man-made disasters, train derailments, pandemics, really dark things that could happen anytime in our community. So when I'm thinking of these resiliency hubs, I like the node concept, but I'm a hub and spoke kind of person when I think of things. So we'll just stick with node. So on a blue sky day, the nodes would be those neighborhoods, because 99% hopefully we're in a blue sky. But two of the experts mentioned something about how do you convert that resiliency hub into an EOC response when it needs to be triggered. And at that point, the node shifts. So we have all the parts, Ben, you're right, but we need to build a system, and a system that can shift who the node goes to based on the current conditions in the community. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And
She's going to respond to that, and then we'll, and then I have questions online too.
One thought that we have internally been talking a lot about that I would propose to the group to consider is that we, when we think of very much in line with what you're saying, Therese, it's kind of, for lack of a better term, I'll say a mother hub. Okay. Is there, if we did go down the route of building upon the existing infrastructure that is out there, could that also be augmented by some sort of mother hub that we already have such a close working relationship with emergency management that was in that general facility, that in a natural disaster, where some of our agencies, their facilities are impacted, they can come and work out of, their staff can automatically be deployed, even though that their facilities have been impacted. If there's a man-made disaster, God forbid, a plane crash, and the county needs some sort of facility where individuals can come and we can have multi-denominational counseling come in there and, act as that mother hub for response. We certainly are happy to consider that. We would love to bring that to our community in partnership with all of our collaborators, because we feel there really is a need, and it was demonstrated after Hurricane Ian. We had over we're currently at like, I don't know, $3 million in volunteer hours that we have coordinated in response activity. So this could also act as a volunteer resource center. You know, there are so many opportunities for this mother hub to act as this collective response to any sort of community disaster, and to have that flexible space is something that we find very exciting, and we feel it's our responsibility based on where we have headed in this community to be a part of.
I think the important part of this is, you know, as we're discussing what works well already and formalize a strategic plan. You know, the emergency management, emergency operations centers is that coordination, communication function already inherent into it. And these community hubs or nodes, as Trez referred to it as, are doing great things on a day in and day out basis. So, you know, from a phased approach, I really don't see that it's taking away and moving into emergency operations. I think maybe the importance of it is we still want those day-to-day functions to be able to take place at the nodes or these resilience hubs, but also in addition to that, what do you need from the emergency operations center and additional resources, whether that's supplies, social workers, what have you. So then we're coordinating that effort and getting those resources efficiently and effectively deployed. And I think that's, you know, the issue that we see a lot of times during disasters, that, you know, if we do things the traditional way and we're setting up these massive care centers, it takes a long time versus bringing quick supplies in, getting them to the hubs where they could be immediately put into action. That allows resiliency and recovery as well.
It's a great point, because people have trouble getting places, right? For a variety of reasons. And then I'm going to go online after you. Okay.
I love what you said about identifying different organizations, and I love United Way. You guys are amazing. And we have so many amazing organizations here in this area that would say, if you need help, like, we are ready, and we are ready to serve and to help. And so one thing I noticed of being here and during the hurricane was we just set up at the church, and FEMA was down the street. And so once they saw what we were doing, they said, you know what, we'll just go ahead and move our stuff to where you guys are at. You guys have this location on lock. We're going to go somewhere else. And so one of the things that can help prevent that and help prevent that delay is identify the organizations, build the relationship, but also, here's the key part, is form an agreement. So I've been in part of churches in Las Vegas, Nashville, and now here. And so even with schools, we have agreements with schools where if there's a shooting or something, then we have a plan on saying, okay, what do you need from us? How can we help you? And the church will stop everything that we're doing and to accommodate them, because there's an emergency. And so we shift our entire day plan for what's happening in the school because that's an emergency. And so I think we found these organizations, and it was clear as far as what help would you need from us? What does that look like? That might help on them being busy, because you basically have given your word, like, hey, it's time to go to war. Do you still have my back? Yes, we have your back. Let's do this. And I think that would help a ton. So
Yeah. So they need to be really flexible and nimble. All right, Harrison, what do we got?
Sure. So we have branch member Angela Katz. Individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities have unique needs, and having a place or organization they are familiar with for information would be very important. That's a comment. And we have Diana Geraldo. How could hubs be prepared for disaster response when people lose their transportation and they are unable to get to where resources are? Finally, I want to point to a comment from Baja around planning departments or sustainability resilience departments being great for coordination, as a comment.
I don't think we have that. Okay. So
I was just going to add, I think the comment on transportation, there's probably a transportation link to any of these workshops that we have, right? So I think that's definitely a common theme there. And I'm hearing, I think one of the common themes I've heard already is that we have a foundation in Lee County, right? I mean, there's incredible people here doing great work. To Ben's comment about bringing that together, I'm curious, from everyone's perspective, and everyone has their day job and their agencies and their stakeholders, just to move us a little bit towards, solutions. And I know we're capturing a lot of this to take away here. In a perfect world, everyone here from your own organizations or your own relationships, are there any specific things that would build on the foundation that we already have. We've talked about, funding, positions. We've talked about hardening a little bit based on location vulnerabilities. Are there any other specific things that would continue to build out this foundation that we already have a great start on here in Lee County, and with these new opportunities after Ian, we can improve on? I'm just curious if there are any things we can throw out there in a say everything's on the table. What would help everyone do their jobs better, both day to day and during a disaster?
I'll share that in Nashville, we've started convening essentially kind of a quarterly roundtable of different organizations and local agencies that work in this space and are interested in this topic. And so that becomes a regular forum for us to talk about the concept of resilience hubs, and has, I think, created a lot of organic conversations and connections amongst different parties that are interested in building out this concept in Nashville. So I don't know if there may be an existing mechanism that occurs in your area that you could build this in kind of as just a regular topic to talk about, but that's been one really helpful way for us, is just having those regular check-ins, again, to kind of just build conversation on the topic.
Yeah, that's great. Regular check-ins, regular discussions. Maria?
I was going to say, not that our case managers and social workers need more training, but I do think it's helpful in these instances, some sort of emergency training, so that they understand the critical role of social services in a disaster. Usually they're just responding immediately because the need is there, so they jump in. But something like a roundtable, get them up to speed on what their roles are, and having the community understand what their roles are.
Got it.
Lee, one of the things that we're doing in City of Cape Coral is we implemented community lifelines, which looks at the community as a whole, what services are working well, how we can maintain those, and then augment it. So what we did that is starting to work well for us is actually you make the investment into your community. We did through our emergency management division is to hire a community risk reduction specialist, an emergency management coordinator that has a master's in social work. Their primary function, as we say, blue sky days, is to be out in the community, building those rapport with the community, building up resiliency by providing training, which then allows us to put agreements into place that we could activate during an emergency and be more efficient in supporting and providing those services. So I think that's the important part of it for us, is not to always look at the response disaster phase of things, but start looking at the social vulnerabilities and what services are the true needs, and focus on that during our response, which is going to allow us to recover sooner.
Thanks, Alvin. John?
I would build on that and also say that as we look at building relationships and increasing our social fabric, we need to learn from things like Ian, when we've had natural disasters, that the folks who are trying to work together, that are sharing the spaces, the legality of that, of who's responsible for what, needs to be transparent ahead of time. I know we've run into several issues, and I'll just use the school and Parks and Rec, and who replaces the lights to get the games back on. And these are situations where we need to get out of our silos, but address the silos when it comes to liability and accountability for our infrastructure. And if we're talking about social resiliency, we have to also look at our fundamental infrastructure, because when those go broken, so do our relationships. So being cognizant of that is my comment.
Katie?
So I think the idea of these resilience hubs are terrific. It's great. So my position is with the Lee County Long-Term Recovery Group, and my job every day is to work myself out of a job. Okay, so my job every day is to help our impacted survivors in this county figure out how we can we want to make them whole, but we want to make them resilient, right? So if you lived on a barrier island in a mobile home, nope, that's not resiliency. You're not getting another mobile home on a barrier island. So the resilience hubs are great, but if we are not utilizing them in blue skies to get out into the community and help our residents and our citizens build personal resilience,
we're going to be in the same position that we're in now. So it's great that they're there, but if we're not out there, it's great to talk about training staff. We need to train our residents. We need to address these gaps pre-incident. Why don't you have insurance? Why are you living in substandard housing? How can we get you to a better place before there's an event so that you're able to better weather a storm?
So did I hear you say you wanted like what assets we currently have and what is an immediate need? Is that kind
I
of?
think, or even long-term, I mean, I think it's worthy of, we have a great foundation here with the services we provide. I think the network is strong. What are some ideas, that would increase that capability?
So maybe it's my PTSD kicking in from having a flooded home, but hurricane season is upon us. And I think that what is a priority is communication within these hubs and nodes and spokes right now. I was a executive director of a very small nonprofit, Lee County Homeless Coalition. I showed up in a damaged office. How do I get to work? How do I mobilize? Talk to executive directors who had staff that were home that weren't affected. How can I mobilize my staff? So I see a need for immediate after a storm, some type of a communication mechanism to deploy all these great resources. So.
So that goes back, Lee, do you have an example of how communities have organized like this elsewhere?
Yeah, I think, and if you take the emergency response phase, which is usually the first weeks to months after an event, I think communication is key. Normally in most communities that response is led by an emergency operations center, whether that's a city or a county, normally how that goes. In those emergency operations centers, I know many of you have been in Lee County's facility. There are multiple roles and positions there that help. The intent there is to communicate to their various stakeholders. And I think on that note, that foundation is there. We can build on it. I think there are opportunities there, and to what we talked about earlier, what is the structure? What is the mechanism that allows for that communication in the immediate aftermath of a disaster? And to Katie's point, just recently, that has to be laid well before the winds start blowing, right? If you wait till the day after landfall and you try to communicate with all your stakeholders and it hasn't been laid in advance, that's not going to work. So I think there's value to having that. We talked about the regular discussions, the regular meetings. I think that an action would be, what does that structure look like on a regular day? And what does that look like well before hurricane season? To me, that battle is won well before June 1st, right? I mean, that's the picture there, and that will assist with that communication. So I think the action would be, what is the organizational structure there to facilitate that communication after something happens, whether that's a hurricane or whatever the event may be.
And I think the key to that is that communication component of it. You're getting that information on people basically within your silo that need assistance in trying to solve that within the silo. And through these agreements that we're talking about is, through, if it is the emergency operations center, those needs coming into the emergency operations center and then playing that connector at the EOC of getting those resources out quickly then to those that need it so they could quickly then recover. So I think that's the important part of having that agreement, but then also equally important is how we're going to be able to efficiently communicate in many different situations, whether we have internet and phone service or not.
And an example there is just to use the Fire Chiefs Association, and you could use them, you could use law enforcement, you could use cities who connect with the county on a daily basis after events. Regular conference calls after a disaster with those entities who perform similar functions to share information, to determine where the worst of the damage is, and to have that back and forth. Regular daily calls after a big event, but that groundwork is laid well before. There's a plan, there's a process. There are monthly or every 2-week meetings with those entities to get them to that point to where they have that conversation after a big event.
So I have a question for Baja or Kendra or both of you. What role does a sustainability, a county sustainability manager, director play, or what role could they play in this process to support the EOC and maybe do some of this coordination outside. Do you have any examples that you could share?
Yeah, I do actually have quite a few examples. The sustainability offices in several different municipalities have been the ones of sustainability and planning have been actually coordinating everybody ahead of time, doing all the sort of project management, bringing in all the different stakeholder groups, the different partners, identifying what the needs are at the site, starting to fill those needs, getting points of contact, making sure people get trained. And then they're in constant communication with the emergency management team to just make sure they're aware of the redundancy at the site of who the community leaders are, the community-based partners, what they've been trained in, what the needs are at the site, and what some of the gaps are that still exist. And then they coordinate with emergency operations to usually go through how to activate the site training and create an operations manual. So they're really kind of using their skill set of project management, but with sustainability, especially, they're thinking about other opportunities to enhance quality of life, make the infrastructure of the site better, think about the building elements, make sure accessibility is happening at the building and things like that. We are currently working in Ward 7 in DC with a site where the planning department at it's the Department of Energy and Environment in DC is actually the lead, and they have been for the past few years. And it's a really excellent relationship of having emergency management, Department of Energy and Environment, and the community leader all coordinate together to make sure that site's fully activated.
And if I can just build on that, I mean, I think, it's really taking a look at, in the context of Lee County, what is the force or the agency that really has the trusted relationships or connections to the agencies and jurisdictions that have those trusted relationships with community, but then can also work across jurisdictional agency silos. In the greater Houston context, it is, as Baja mentioned, an Office of Resilience and Sustainability, who is that coordinating mechanism, bringing Office of Emergency Management to the table, bringing the health department and other agencies to the table, because what we've heard from residents is a resilience hub must deliver against sort of food insecurity concerns and access to health services concern, being that trusted venue in the day in, day out. So I think for Lee County, it's both who are the agencies, organizations that have those trusted relationships with communities, but then also have the heft, if you will, to work across and convene those agencies together across jurisdictional boundaries to really bring the plan together.
Stephanie?
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add here is I think we have found that documentation and formalization of the concept has been really important. And I think I'm hearing through y'all's dialogue that there's a lot of this work ongoing. And so I think ensuring that coordinating entity has the capacity to lead all of the appropriate parties through kind of that documentation piece is really important as well. And so that's the only thing I'll add. We've also played a little bit of a role in terms of trying to identify funding opportunities or connect pieces of funding from different agencies that can be used to kind of augment existing on-site capabilities. So that's another role we've played.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you. I think that there's clarity that we have significant infrastructure and the framework and solidifying that. I think we're moving away from the gap, right? I believe the macro operations exists. I believe that a lot of what we're talking about is already mapped out through emergency management, operations, sunny skies, all day, every day. What we're talking about is developing a micro version, neighborhood level, as was mentioned. There's so many obstacles to transportation and resources that we're going to need to identify, not just the trusted partners. There's a lot of organizations here in this room and online who know the trusted partners in each of the areas of need. But gray skies, everyone is in need. Everything is a priority. Everything is urgent. And what there needs to be, I question if there has been a formal assessment or mapping of all of the grassroots efforts that Cape Christian, yes, thank you for everything that you did. There are dozens and dozens more that were activated that received FEMA support, right? Merging into where what makes sense. And then also Red Cross. So from my perspective, I observed disconnects in the pod distributions, the United Way distributions, and the Red Cross distributions. And then you had this tremendous outpouring of faith-based and other nonprofit organizations who just started activating themselves. The resources became apparent and would show up according to their own relationships. And I know that there are some churches where there were churches from all across the state and the nation supporting those churches. So I think formalizing that network that had been invisible, to your point about relationships, making it visible, and then folding in whatever MOU or agreement according to whatever is most appropriate for that organization. I imagine some organizations would be very uncomfortable entering into any agreement with any government agency, including a public nonprofit health system. So how do we create a safe space to thank our organizations for the work that was done, the 10,000, 12, 20,000, 30,000 meals a day? And then what were some of the lessons learned? How can we leverage assets that didn't exist during Irma? Like, oh my gosh, Starlink. And leveraging whatever hubs are created. A headquarter hub might be a good, the mother hub, head HQ hub. But take that macro operations that exists and funnel it through. I think that our if we were to map it out, I think we would find there's very few neighborhoods that have true gap. And we could solidify whether through United Way agencies. I think that the United Way houses are a huge home run. But then we can also be communicating that. And I love the idea of bringing all of those groups together. Quarterly sounds really overwhelming to me right now.
Weekly, you want to do
Let's
weekly?
just start. Just start.
Every day. Yeah. Jennifer.
So I love the idea of a sustainability office. And if some of you remember, we did have one of those at one time. And I will put my planning cap back on. We also have documents and policies. Our comprehensive plan gives us direction on how to interlocally, governmentally work together. But we do need a champion to hold and be the nucleus for all these hyper local community centers. And unfortunately, I know that's a big ask of government, but you need a champion within these organizations to come together. We all realize how important public information officers are. Everybody has one. Well, what if you had a table where all the public information officers went, right? I don't know what that looks like, but somebody within the community needs to chair it. And I hate to deflect it back to government, but there's a reason we have government. There's a reason we have policies. There's a reason we have implementation of codes, because somebody has to be accountable to secure the sustainability, resiliency, whatever you call it, for our children here. And I believe, unfortunately, and I know they're going to be upset about me saying this, but it needs to be embedded in one way or another within a government organization.
I would add to that briefly that I believe there's likely a Switzerland approach. I agree with you that there ought to be some formality through the county mechanism, but there are robust efforts underway with community collaboratives where health and wellness would be a very fitting support for all of that work and the connectivity, and then providing not just the relationship management, but creating that safe space for convening to determine what the best path forward is in a mutually beneficial way for each of the organizations, no matter how large or small or how they're organized.
One thing that I think I have found helpful is, again, trying to understand where those interdisciplinary and kind of cross-functional, multi-departmental conversations are already ongoing. As an example, I'll share with you, I mentioned at the outset that we're endeavoring to, again, embed resilience across city operations. And so there is, and I also mentioned our sustainability and resilience roundtable. Right now, that's one of, I would say, 4 or 5 multi-departmental conversations focused on a specific scope of work or interest area. But what I'm noticing is that we may have sustainability and resilience as a focus area. There's also a health and all task force that's convening. And then we also have a DEI focused multi-departmental group. And it ends up being the same people who are participating in all of those circles. And so I would encourage you all to first take an inventory of where those, and we also have an infrastructure roundtable. And so I would encourage you all to maybe take stock of where you're already seeing departments as well as community partners work in those, at those significant nexuses, and see if maybe one of those groups can help provide guidance on this effort. If it doesn't seem like a good fit, then I think it would make sense to try to identify perhaps a new group or subset of entities to tackle this, because I have felt that there's a little bit of fatigue, because again, each of those interdisciplinary efforts is drawing from the same small subset of individuals in each of those agencies. So it's becoming a resource strain.
Ben, thank you.
Just a couple of quick comments. So from the communication standpoint, the communications, the hub of communications is the Joint Information Center in the EOC. We had more than 50 community public information officers who participated in that. Some of them were physically present, some of them were virtual. They were all on the phone every single day, talking about what was going on and communicating what was happening. Where the gap is that when we have incredible partners in the community doing things, and that message doesn't get through the 4 or 5 layers to be able to get to the PIOs to say you should go get a really good meal over at Cape Christian. I'll see you at Cape Christian next time. If that message isn't getting to those PIOs, they can't get the message out to the community. And so some of that great work is under leveraged when it could be better utilized. I have a couple of notes that I've made just throughout the last couple of speakers. And I think from my perspective, what we need, because we have some framework, but it is not fully, it's not really planned beyond this is where some people will sit, and we will expect that it will happen organically within the community. And Irma is a great example, because the work that happened during Irma organically went a long way to take care of community needs for a couple of days until everything got back on its, the power came back on, the water was on, everything was good. Ian is a different situation where you have a much more prolonged length of time, as well as greater needs within the community that have to be addressed by a much larger group of community partners with assistance from outside agencies. So some questions that I wrote down that I think would go into probably a broader planning effort that would be eventually part of a plan within the Emergency Operations Center, working with whoever that community partner is. Switzerland idea is I fully understand that. Is it the 15 United Way houses, or are there more communities that have to be reached? And how do we get to where we can identify those communities, and do we need to add capacity to those United Way houses? Are they resilient? Are they hardened? Do they have power generation? Do they have the things to be able to make them accessible? Pre-planning for other community partners. And a couple of things are very important. One, what is their expected capacity? So if if Cape Christian is cooking food, and we're going to expect for you to, jump in and cook food in the next storm, I want you to know pre-landfall, hey, we're going to expect you to cook food, But there's other organizations, faith-based nonprofits, other groups that come in and they have specific capacities that should be inventoried, the geography that they serve. You know, it would be inappropriate to take the Heights Foundation and ask them to go to North Fort Myers necessarily and provide services. Like the Heights Foundation stays in Heights. That's where they serve the community. They're competent. They work with that community. That's where they should stay. So what geography would they be expected to serve, and how would they otherwise fit in? And then to broaden that, I think going back to the broader conversation is, how do you then leverage those community resources to address the blue sky needs, as well as in blue skies, reinforce the things that Katie touched on and Alvin and others, that, you know, we need to educate the community on how they can better prepare themselves so that they're less relying on the community resources and more self-reliant and able to take care of themselves in the first couple of days.
Yep. So it sounds like you basically just mapped out the framework of an inventory that we need. And so I just want to, that is an important potential initiative that could come out of this group. I mean, you laid it all out. I mean, you hit it. I don't know that you missed much, if you missed anything at all. So we have the workings of that. The job of doing that is a very big job. And so I think we do this idea of like, is it a sustainability office? Is it the United Way? Is it the EOC? I'm not sure. I think that's something we've really got to figure out. But the inventory is critically important to this, and then figuring out how that's managed over time, because those things change on a daily basis. So Harrison, you have some questions for us?
Sure do. So we have branch member Maya Roberts, City of Cape Coral Environmental Manager. I agree with the previous speaker. I would like to point out that discussions from today, including interdisciplinary, have occurred. Several groups present today have attended several community meetings at the Southwest Florida Resilience Compact efforts. Resources, community leaders, and government resources exist across disciplines. We need to agree on a common vehicle for it and focus with a physical location. She also submitted several online resources as well. And then I would also note Baja from USDN also just makes known that there are many resources online from USDN on the build out and support for a resilience hubs building or development process. So those are resources that exist and are happy to be shared.
Awesome. Yep. Real quick.
Just real quick with the transportation piece that was mentioned earlier, and it's been mentioned a couple of times, with the existing hubs that we have, they are all located on a bus stop, on a bus line, as well as being strategically located within the community. So it is walkable. That is something that is key when we identify those houses. And then with the faith-based piece, you know, I think that even though we're here to look forward, I don't think we can without the lessons learned, right? And really absorbing what we learned through Ian. And that was that there are so many amazing faith-based organizations and very small pocketed organizations doing great work. And that has been kind of one of the good things that have come out of this experience, is that we have now connected with them. And I don't want to speak for our friends at Public Safety and Emergency Management, but we are working with them now to reach out to all of those faith-based organizations that we possibly can, to do a survey of what they did during Ian, and what they have the capacity to do, because some of them did things that they probably don't ever want to do again, like donation management. So, you know, how can we get ahead of what they're doing, and how can we support that in their efforts? So that survey is taking place, and hopefully they will have a more robust connectivity to the response moving forward. So there is a groundwork for that happening.
Awesome. Kate.
So I've heard a lot of people say, like, not reinventing the wheel and looking at what we already are doing really well. And I am kind of biased. We are a United Way house in Dunbar, and communication is huge. And looking at, you know, we have a generator. We never lost power. I live on Pine Island. Fortunately, I made the decision to evacuate and stayed at my office with my 2 potbelly pigs and my 2 dogs. And it was the most uncomfortable 10 days of my life, but I would do it 100 times over again, just because I knew that's where I needed to be. And the day after the hurricane, there was no buses. So transportation wasn't even a thing. But we did what we do best, and we have our Meals on Wheels drivers out the day after the hurricane, and we made sure that every single one of our Meals on Wheels homebound seniors were taken care of. We did things that we probably wouldn't do again, unless we really had to. I was tarping roofs in mobile homes. We had no road to get to Pine Island. So fortunately, my family owns a charter business. So we got our boats and loaded up fuel and food and MREs and pet food and anything we could to bring out to Sanibel, to Captiva, to Pine Island, to Fort Myers Beach. So looking at, United Way and United Way houses are strategically placed, and we worked with the partners that we already have really great relationships with. And I think it would be really beneficial to look at the mapping out what these grassroots organizations did and how quickly they were able to do that. They are small, but we're mighty. Fish is mighty. Suncoast Community Center is mighty, and just tapping in and, okay, we don't have this, you do. All right. Kind of like the old days, let's barter. How can we make sure that people in your neighborhood are taken care of? How can we make sure people in my neighborhood are taken care of?
Tesla, I'd like to, Tessa, respond to Ben's response. I'm not surprised you came up with this. And Tessa said, you just made the inventory, because I know when COVID hit, it was a pandemic none of us were prepared for. And Lee Health found itself being like the EOC, if you will, of a pandemic, where that wasn't a role that we were familiar with. This was something we'd never seen before. And within our own organization, we shifted midstream to a structure you all use at the EOC, the Incident Command Structure. It's evidence-based. It worked in a social service, mental health, medical way. So what you're saying, I'm tag you're it, but you really do have the skills to be able to come up with something that could respond. In our committee, we talked about red. Stephanie Inc. Edwards from CCMI said we need a red, yellow, and green plan. Red is our gray skies, green is our blue skies, yellow is we're trying to get to green. So I'm excited. The question I have is, we haven't heard from Katie, because I'm kind of trying to figure out where long-term recovery group comes into this strategy. You have a structure that you oversee for the Lee County Long-Term Recovery Group. How does that play into any of this discussion we're talking about here with resiliency? Is there an opportunity to leverage your structure?
I think that depends on. So the Lee County, the Long-Term Recovery Group is contracted by Lee County to Catholic Charities as the fiscal agent. So to that question, I would say we would have to look at what the contract sort of says that our mission is, and is there a desire to see that expanded upon? Because really what the Long-Term Recovery Group, I should point out, recovery is not resiliency, right? Recovery is literally, we have been impacted. Now we need to recover from this impact. Resiliency is proactive. Recovery is reactive. So they are they're very different. I wouldn't discount that there's an opportunity for further discussion and involvement, but I just want to make sure we're really clear about when we're talking about recovery, it is different than resiliency building. It can play a part in resiliency building, and it should be a part of your mitigation, right? You should be, like I mentioned before, we should be building back better. We should be building more resilient residents through the recovery group. So though resiliency is a part of recovery, it is not the end all be all to resiliency.
Thank you.
So I can help with that. I'm just going to jump in. I'm sorry. As a University of Florida employee, I am hybrid employed through Lee County. Lee County hires the Lee County Extension Office. We are University of Florida faculty to help the county do the things you need. We are underutilized in this community, and I am saying I've got an app for that. I can't believe I just said that. But so in academia, to measure qualitative data, we use a tool called ripple effect mapping. guess what? I have a connection and a reach back to the University of Florida, and we actually work with Florida Gulf Coast too, to be able to do this social mapping and data for this community. And to tie it into what we were talking about yesterday, we have students in social work, in nursing, in planning, and law enforcement at not only our career technical education schools here in Lee County, but also in our higher educational institutions. So I think with the ability of a cheerleader, a champion, and when I was saying earlier, we just need somebody to carry the torch to keep us all going, whether it's the government, whether it's United Way, whether it's Healthy Lee, because we've been trying for years, to take it and pass it off, because it's exhausting doing it all the time. But there are tools, there are things we can do to support this. And one of the initiatives I'm going to suggest is use the ripple effect mapping to do the inventory, to connect the players, to build the community social fabric that we need in order to be resilient and recover.
If I may, yay, yes, deal. Right, I'm speaking out of school. But I think we're still getting caught up in the gap between the macro and the micro, right? The very first convening of the long-term recovery group, right at the outset was, this is at the individual and family level. And I immediately thought, oh, time out. That's not how we function our outreach efforts. We leverage the macro. And I think the hubs are the way to bridge between the macro and the micro level, neighborhood level macro. I just want to remind us.
Draw that for us.
I can.
Thank
I
you.
absolutely can.
Whiteboard.
Are you serious?
Well, so there's the system, and there's someone who needs to be people, it's not maybe just, you have an eye on the system, which is invisible. So you do need to map it. And then there are, and that those individuals work with partners, and then the partners are boots on the ground, right? So it is absolutely looking at the system. You have to have someone with their eye on the whole system, but they are not going to be interacting with the individuals on the ground. They are interacting with partners in a variety of ways. They have to resource partners so that partners can change the outcomes across the board.
And I would add to that, you have formally organized nonprofits, businesses, but then you also have collectives.
Yeah.
So you don't just have Healthy Lee or the Housing Coalition or right. There are a tremendous number of coalitions. Please save the chat box today because there's a lot of questions about the other coalition that we don't have awareness of. But that is the coalition of the coalitions is just one more avenue. I also want, before I forget and before we run out of time, talking about the resiliency of the individual. So leveraging, yes, the United Way hubs have that social component and the navigation. How do we take that footprint and expand it further? We know what other organizations or neighborhoods have formal hubs like Heights, Pine Manor, etc. But folding in whatever social services are needed. And I think that is probably the segue into the individual for case management.
Right. Yeah. And I, to like what you're saying, I would very much argue what you're describing is the mission of the collaboratory, right? Is building a better Lee County within one generation. So not saying that you should own this.
No pressure.
But truly, if building a better Lee County in 18 years, this is very much what is the work that you're engaged day to day in.
Down to 16, and thank you for hosting.
Yeah, you're welcome.
TikTok.
Okay, so we are about at time. So any other burning questions from branch members? Because I've got to do public comment. No. Okay, so one thing I want to mention, and this is for everybody, including you know, any public or whomever, am I, okay. On here, the QR code, you can scan it. There's a link where you can fill in a form regarding initiatives that have either come out of this conversation or that you didn't get a chance to share or that you think are important that could help us address the issues that we're discussing today. This is a really big, complex issue because it literally involves everything. And it involves everything all the time, right? So I think anything we can do to figure out how to be more efficient in the way we use our resources for being more resilient is the direction we need to go. I think that this idea of a coalition of coalitions is really important because that's how you burn down into the system, how you funnel down into the bottom of things. But you got to have something at the top watching the system that's sort of managing that and tracking how the numbers are going and making sure that we're moving in the right direction. That is going to take a really, really robust effort in building our capacity to actually work together. We all as humans are great at networking. We are not great at collaborating. It's a process. It's different than just showing up and then, you know, I'll see you next month, right? So this is a capacity building thing that has to happen. There has to be the capacity to truly collaborate and work together. And that depends heavily on our relationship. So managing it at multiple levels is really, really important. So I just want to mention that as we're sort of talking about how do you manage such a big number of things, right? That are all interconnected. There are ways to do it, but it's going to take a really strong commitment. So initiatives, ideas, things that you think can help benefit that, please go ahead and submit them. Any other thoughts, Branch? Anything the panel wants to mention or online really quick before I move to public comment? Anything in the chat? No? We good? All right. Public comment. Does anyone have anything they want to say? I should start walking over before I ask because I already know the answer.
My name is Betsy and I'm with the Immigration Network. I'm the coordinator and really appreciate everything that you guys said today. A couple of things I think that's important. John had numbers last week of the number of people that are going to stay in the next storm that we have. They are not leaving. So I think when we're talking about resiliency, we have to take that into account, that we have a significant number of people, regardless of what it says, they're not leaving. The other thing is the pockets of care that we need. Seniors and then the immigration community are two of the folks. When we look at substandard housing or we look at no insurance, those are probably cost factors related to those two groups in particular.
Thank you.
This is Terry Mazzani with Collaboratory. Want to emphasize a point that the conversation kept creeping up to, but didn't solidly land on. Heard about how do we resource our partners? How do we invest in the capacity? But I didn't hear getting across to, okay, where are the dollars going to come from? How will this funding be prioritized and who's going to provide that? When we think about a church and a congregation being expected to instantly stand up 20,000 meals a day, but without the pre-staging of the fuel that they may need, the walk-in coolers, the other facilities, the assured water supplies. Here at Collaboratory, we became an instant hub, a great resilience hub. We missed one thing. We don't have a dependable water supply to be able to make sure that we are fully operational 24/7. Everything else we did fine. We would also benefit from having a storage unit to hold the cots and other facilities that we would want to deploy at that moment. There are real costs, real dollars that are being expected of the community partners, the nonprofits, but I don't see where the commitment of funding that is. We do know what the cost of not being resilient is. It's in the billions of dollars. It's pennies on the dollar to invest now in building out and supporting the cost of collaboration, the cost of preparedness, the cost of having the resources and facilities for these hubs. So as part of this conversation, I think it's important to add the dollar costs for these resilient hubs and identify the sources of funding to make that happen.
Such a great point, because our nonprofit organizations, our faith-based organizations, they're not, rolling in the dough, right? So we got to figure out if we're going to use this as part of our plan for resilience over time, how do we make sure that they are stabilized and that they actually have what they need? Pre-planning is not just, hey, we're going to expect you to make food. It's like, are you actually capable of making food? And we heard this a lot in the infrastructure group, right? This idea of like, we know the people that we always talk to, but we are not necessarily checking to see if they have all the supplies they need. If we're ready in the end to see if we need to be bartering resources or working with other communities. And so that has to be part of it, a much more robust understanding of what's happening. I appreciate that. Any other public comment? Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Jamilat Santana Reyes, American Red Cross Community Adaptation Program. The reason I'm speaking is because you actually nailed it. We are a new program. We are actually in 10 locations, and I know you hear about the Red Cross with doing the the cardiac arrest trainings, the blood mobiles and whatnot, but we're a little different, right? We are trying to help the community exactly what you just mentioned, is trying to help them with an enhancement process, right? It could be, social services, it could be whatever the gap is locally to hopefully reduce the stress on the government level. And so just wanted to put my name out there. Fish and I, we're already collaborating and doing some great enhancement opportunities, also doing some great partners with the food banks and so forth. Now, I'm the one coordinator. The goal is to have another coordinator and a manager. So bear with me. We're hoping to, fill the team soon, but we already have 10 locations throughout in California. We have 2 close in proximity. And the reason for that is we realize the vulnerable communities. That's how we're able to establish these programs. And so we really want to expand it more. But right now, the American Red Cross nationally is looking at it from a vulnerable community perspective. So more to come on that. Probably going to be getting some business cards from the panel here, but thank you so much, and great conversation as far as the micro level, because that is where we're heading. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right. I just want to say one more thing. Distributing the responsibility of this, there's a cost benefit to that too. Terry made such a great point about what we know what the cost of not being ready, not being resilient is. And so I think we have to recognize that while as funds come in, thinking strategically about how we resource these other entities to become and to play a bigger role in a proactive way so that they're actually able to play the role that we need them to, I think that has a pretty good ROI. So, all right, Stephanie.
Thank you. Just one final burning desire I had failed to mention. With regard to organizations at every level, Terry, you reminded me with your comments of lessons learned. And some organizations may never want to do what they did ever again. And others will not love the experience that they had, but there's no world where they're not going to do it again. And how do we leverage not just that information in order to improve for future state, but also leverage a culture of volunteerism and a culture of redistribution of action. So maybe those who will never activate in that way ever again might find a home somewhere else in a gray sky area. And then the other piece that I wanted to mention was capturing ahead of time what I had misunderstood Volunteer Florida to be. And that's all I have to say.
So Lee, would you like to add anything else and close us out?
Yeah, no, this is exciting. I think, it's refreshing to hear the acknowledgement of what clearly we do well in Lee County, and the comments on what we can do better. So, I mean, what an opportunity to spend the next however long figuring out where to make these investments, to map out, what we have and what we can do better, and really to build the plan. I mean, the victory here is going to be in the plan that walks us through all these details and puts something on paper. So I can't wait to see what we captured through the 2-hour conversation here and what some of the next steps are. So thank you all for your open feedback. It's great discussion.